In a world where people disagree, two guys, one liberal, one conservative, two guys who disagree about stuff.
Trevor, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Yeah, it was a good day. How you been? Are you doing okay? You're down there in Texas. You've been doing all right.
We've been fortunate. A lot of igloos have been built, but the village will survive. And on that note,
Speaking of climate, yeah.
no, I guess this has been debunked already, but I saw a tweet floating around from Ted Cruz supposedly in 2016 where he says, "I'll believe in climate change when Texas freezes over."
Oh no!
And apparently he didn't actually tweet
Tweets that
that.
haven't aged well. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I saw that, I had to chuckle a little bit.
I guess we're going to start. We're trying out some new format adjustments. We're going to start with a little bit of a spiel on our own viewpoints, kind of establish that real quick, and then we're going to get into some questions that we thought were interesting, that we want to know the answer to. What does the other person think about this?
Yeah, and
Michael, do you want to start off with the spiel? Or?
yeah, I will. And I guess going into a little bit why we want to do this is a lot of times when people disagree, some of the disagreement stems from their fact base being different. They're operating from completely different vantage points or viewpoints. And our purpose here isn't necessarily to debate those points, but it is to at least highlight where we're coming from. So for me, I am more on the conservative side than the progressive side when it comes to this issue. The fact base that I operate from is that we have a climate. The climate.
We live in a society.
Yes, we live in a society with a climate. And, I mean, the basic science as I understand it is the sun radiates energy in the form of heat. That heat is absorbed by the earth and is absorbed by the water, and then a portion of that energy gets reflected back out into the atmosphere. And it would go away indefinitely. However, we do have that atmosphere that traps some of it in. And greenhouse gases are what we focus on a lot. Water vapor being one of them, but others being, of course, carbon dioxide, methane, etc. Those molecules, those substances, whatever they are in our atmosphere, trap in heat. And what's happening now is more of that heat is being trapped and kept close to the surface of the earth than normal, or at least what we have historically witnessed. And scientific projections project that over the course of the next 100 years, the average temperature on Earth will increase between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius. So as far as what's happening, that's the science that I can generally get behind. And these are all probabilities, right? So there's like a 90% confidence interval that it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees. And then there's also a small chance that it's less than that, and there's a small chance that it's bigger than that. But that's pretty much the general consensus. Is there anything that you would add or modify there?
I want to ask, so you believe that climate change is happening, and then you also believe that humans contribute, yeah?
Yeah, I do believe that human beings, I think that this is something that everyone on the right would agree with me on, is we're putting a lot of carbon dioxide out into the atmosphere, whether it's impacting the climate or not, right? But I do happen to be of the belief that, yes, we are contributing to climate change, or at least a change in our atmosphere that is less than good.
I think based on the pre-episode and our conversation this past week, I think that our fact base on this is thankfully pretty similar. We both believe that climate change is happening. Human beings are contributing a large part of that. And it's good. Probably good for the sake of the conversation that we do share as much fact base as we do. I think we do disagree on the solution and how and what form that should take, but we do not, as far as I know, we don't disagree as to the issue itself, like what's happening, which is handy, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess
So
I guess one thing
ahead.
that I would add to my fact base, if I could amend my statement at least slightly, I would also add the fact that those same projections that project a 2 to 4 degree increase in average global temperature also estimate the economic impact of those changes, and it equates to about 3% of GDP. So, do I think that those changes, or do I think that we're impacting the climate? Yes. Do I think that if we continue to increase our emissions at the same rate, that it will result in that global warming that is fairly significant? Yes, I absolutely do. I also feel that those economic projections are probably pretty close as well, that it's not going to hurt us in nearly the fashion that a lot of people would purport it to be. Like, it's not zero. It's definitely not zero, but it's also not an apocalypse.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not an expert. I think it's a serious challenge. It's probably not an apocalyptic threat, which I think sometimes it gets characterized as, and that's not to downplay it. I would say that it's extremely serious and will cause. I think that unfortunately the consequences can't be predicted of a lot of the things that global warming can set in motion, because there's things about our ecosystem and our planet that we don't fully understand. Things like ocean acidification,
Sure.
permafrost melting, things like that. So I'm very concerned, but I will say that I think it's sometimes not helpful to, I think as shorthand, especially on the left, I think sometimes people refer to it as the end of the world. And I think one that's not quite right. I don't think that's, I mean, it could be, I don't know, but it's not really guaranteed, even if all these things happen, which a lot of them will. A lot of these consequences are coming. Unfortunately, we're not going to avert them. To the degree is, I guess the question is, to what degree will we not avert them? Because we're not averting them, unfortunately. So we're going to have to deal with these things. But I think that if we say it's the end of the world, I almost think it has the opposite effect that's intended. I think sometimes the more catastrophic you make something, the worse you portray a serious issue, sometimes the less likely people are to act on it. Just weirdly enough, I think people get depressed and they're like, oh wow, the world is going to end. We're all going to die. And I almost think if you gave them the minor consequences, then they might care more.
No, I think that's true. I mean, from my line of work, I work in commercial real estate investment sales. And pricing a property appropriately is actually really important. These are facts and figures that our firm has produced. But if you price a property at market value, about 60% of the active investor base will view your asset. And then offers will trickle in from there, right? But you get 60% of the eyes. If you're 5% over market, that figure drops to about 25%. And if you are priced 10% above the market, you only get 2% of the eyes. Right? So the bigger your number, the bigger your projection, or the more you blow something up or inflate something, the less seriously it's taken.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of anti-smoking campaigns. And I don't have a good reference here handy, so I hope I don't get this wrong and anyone can correct me. But I've heard this concept that sometimes these fear-based advertisements for smoking cessation have the opposite effect. You know, they stress people out. If the problem is so big, I think sometimes people can't think about it. And if I'm remembering right, I think there was a case where they started to try to use like the sexual side effects to get people to stop. Like instead of like, you're going to die of cancer, they're like, maybe you won't perform as well. And then maybe,
everyone's like, oh
don't
no,
quote me.
stay
You
away
know,
from those.
I could have totally mischaracterized, misremembered that. But I do think that this principle does apply, just non-scientifically. I feel like from what I know about people, I think sometimes, yeah.
No, I would agree with that. So I guess my question for you then is, what do we do about it? Because this is where we do differ.
Yeah. Okay, so I believe that, I think that private companies, unfortunately, I think the logic of capitalism is just such that if I'm a company, you're probably not going to do things that hurt your bottom line, even if it's going to help the common good. I just don't see it. I think that companies sometimes do these things that we are unhappy with, shocked with, because they're dedicated to this logic of profit. And I think I'm very skeptical of their desire or ability to affect this without central control, I guess. I believe that it's a collective problem and it requires collective action and collectivist action that means like you can't just do what you want. Sometimes even I am a little skeptical of this is going to sound extremely dumb, but I'm sometimes a little skeptical of like, hey, go recycle your cans and bottles. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying I'm sometimes skeptical of ideas that are based on personal choice. Like, oh, if we just all decide to do Meatless Monday, we're going to fix it. Because I don't believe that people will do it without something coming top down, in a sense. Democratic, obviously, but with a law, with something like that. When I lived in Germany, you were required to sort your garbage.
Yeah.
And so I sorted my garbage. You know, I think sometimes it makes a difference. It's not. People need a little push, even if they agree with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice if everybody has to play by the same rules.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think I also agree with the sense that capitalism, not only is it's profit seeking, which I don't necessarily see as a problem. For example, Walmart makes a profit. They make huge profits, but they provide something to me at a very low cost, right? So I don't feel like I'm losing out because of the existence of Walmart. So I don't think that profitability is the problem. I think what is the problem potentially is capitalism is very reactionary. If you look at the pandemic, for example, and you look at masks, no one was going out 2 years before the pandemic and saying, I'm going to create a personalized mask line or a customized mask line. No, it happened after the fact. And so maybe one of the potential problems of just leaving it up to the marketplace is they don't start to solve the problems until the problems are already here.
All right, so we've talked about fact-based. Michael, so could you describe, before we get started with some more intense questions, maybe you could lay out your stance on what we should do a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I would like to see individuals make better decisions on a personal level. I like to point out every once in a while that conservatism shares a root with conservation. So not only should we look to conserve or preserve our way of life, our culture, the foundation of who we are as a society, but we should look to conserve and preserve our natural resources, the natural beauty that we're so fortunate to be able to enjoy in our country. So that's number one, better individual decisions. I would like to see a majority of the innovation be spearheaded in the private sector by companies and individuals. I keep going back to real estate tonight for some reason, but I think it does apply here. If you look at development timelines for new real estate projects in California versus Texas, or at least most communities in Texas, for example, it's a night and day difference. You know, a project where you go from buying the land, drafting the proposal, all the way to getting approval and eventually breaking ground, in a lot of Texas communities can get done in a couple of months. In the state of California, that process usually takes years. And if global warming is the problem that it's being made out to be, that, hey, if we don't do something now, we're going to really be in a world of hurt, my preference would be for our technology development to be agile versus just large. I would like to see a greater amount of efficiency there. And that's not to say that government can't have zero or has to have zero role in the way this is done. Obviously, that's not true. But I would like to see that role be limited. I like what they've been doing with solar, for example, you know, with the solar power subsidies. If you look at what's happened, solar has tripled in efficiency in a very short amount of time, like a decade or so, right? I can now get a solar roof thanks to Elon Musk.
He would love that. He would eat that up. Yes, thanks to me.
Yeah, I think what he would say is, you know, that's all great and all, but now I'm going to focus on colonizing Mars. Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's what it is. So I want to see personal responsibility taken first. Secondly, I would like to see the more private sector spearhead the innovation. And then there is a role for government, but I would like to see that more in the form of subsidies versus a tax. And, you know, I could tolerate a few rules and laws like you have to sort your own trash and things like that. I'd be okay with that to a degree, but I feel like a lot of the solutions that have come from the left all center around penalizing and taxing these oil and gas companies or industries that rely on fossil fuel energies. I don't like that one bit.
Try and characterize your general view on it is basically you are skeptical of the efficiency of government solutions, I think is one point. Is that you feel like they're less agile, they're bogged down, they tend to be bogged down in bureaucracy. And I think there's another aspect of maybe, I might need to ask some follow-up on that, but maybe I'm detecting some resentment of control there. Like maybe you don't like the carrot in the carrot versus the stick. You're more okay with the carrot. You're like, okay, if government's gonna spend on subsidies or something like that, you're more okay with that than, for instance, taxing, like a more punitive, the stick, like punishing emissions. And why do you think that might be? If that is the case, why do you think you might feel that way?
Well, I feel like a lot of it actually just has to do with a questioning of motives. I am not sure that they are as sincere or transparent as they are purported to be. I mean, if you look at the Green New Deal, for example, it was under the guise of, hey, this is for a cleaner, more sustainable economy for our environment moving forward, when they had a bunch of critical race theory stuff. And I don't understand what race has to do with keeping our planet and our atmosphere clean and preventing global warming, if that makes sense. So everything that I see proposed after something that ridiculous, I'm going to be skeptical of, even if it's not necessarily warranted. There's always just going to be a little apprehension there. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I think maybe both a skepticism of how efficient the government might be, and then also a skepticism of collective action in this way, in a more what would you say? Like, as to where it might lead with more control, bigger government or something, like what does this mean in other aspects?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the solutions seem a little bit heavy-handed to me. Like, but that does lead me to a question for you, in that, what do you think the relationship should be between environmental progress and economic sacrifice?
I think that the reality is that there's going to be things where we're going to have to change the way that we live in ways that are inconvenient in the short run, because we're trying to avoid bigger problems. Like, I think it's super convenient to use Ziploc bags, something like that, or to just eat a lot of meat. I think it's maybe not convenient, but maybe enjoyable.
Sure.
But I think the reality is we're gonna have to eat less meat. I mean, it's going to happen. It's not. It's not like a question of like, oh, should we? It's like we will have to. It's gonna get more expensive. It's gonna get. I mean, the climate change is gonna force some kind of changes to the way that we live in any case, and I guess I think we need to face that reality in a way, and I think that this is an issue that's going to require collective action, collective sacrifice, and sometimes I'm concerned not just by the right, but by all of our appetite for that. I think sometimes we're so short term, we're such an instant culture that none of us, not even the left, are willing to really do what it takes. I think sometimes we do things that make us feel better. I'm going to throw my aluminum cans in the recycling, something like that. It's like, are we really going to do what it takes? I don't know. And I think that people are going to need a bit of a nudge, including me. I'm skeptical of action on the individual level. I'm less skeptical of laws, of things that are coming. It's like, okay, look, we're not going to use plastic bags anymore. This might be, not to harp too much on this one issue, it's just a random example. It's like, yeah, there's people that bring a paper bag. I mean, there's people that bring the reusable bag to Harmon's or whatever. But a more instantaneous solution might be just like, look, don't do plastic bags anymore. It's a law. Because otherwise, it's going to take way longer if it ever happens. I don't know. We were talking a bit about this in the pre-episode, and maybe this question, I think, is not perfect, as many things are. But I was wondering, I wonder sometimes about climate change, about the pandemic, and some of these other threats. I guess my traditional understanding of conservatism was you're going to react very strongly to a threat. Something threatens, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get rid of this uncertainty, get rid of this threat. But I feel like my understanding was challenged, I think, by the pandemic, and not to get too off topic, but I think also by climate change. I think it's something where sometimes I don't understand why some threats, why not others? Why terrorism, for instance, but not climate change? Why does this not, I don't want to say excite, but make people care about it as much, if I may say?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I think I don't want to speak for everybody necessarily, but I think that part of it has to do with maybe not so much threat, but challenge. Like, does it challenge the status quo? On the issue of the pandemic, one of the first things that was done was cities closed down and had shelter-in-place orders for a couple of weeks, and it put businesses out of business. They had to close down permanently. And so I feel like a lot of conservatives were already on edge and they just needed an excuse to dislike the coronavirus before they started to rebel against it. And then that excuse came in the form of blaming the coronavirus on Donald Trump
Right.
and other conservatives, conservative media, just conservatives out in society in general. So you took an issue where people on the right were already a little bit iffy, and then you gave them a reason to go to the extreme and to just fight against all of the data and all of the science that was being done at the time. And so I think this does relate really well to climate change in that, a lot of the workers that rely on fossil fuels or who are in the oil and gas business, they tend to be a little bit more conservative. And, farmers definitely fall into that boat as well, with all the cows and the methane. But if changes are proposed to them that, hey, we need to reduce our emissions and we need to start being a little bit more conscientious of our environment, they're already going to say, I'm not sure I like that. But I don't think at that point they are totally against the change. But I think what sets them over the edge is, because of this climate change, these are all of the new policies that we have to put in place. These are the new taxes. These are the new regulations. Here are all the new rules. Oh, and by the way, if you don't agree to our solution, you're the enemy. You're part of the problem. And so at that point, I feel like a lot of conservatives are just like, you know what? Fine. You know what? I don't care. This is a fake science. It's hoax. Global warming is completely made up just for government power. Even if initially or at the foundational level, they somewhat agree with the science or even totally agree with the science, they're going to be contrarian just because of how you're treating them, if that makes sense.
I think that Michael's point on this is sorry, refer to you in the third person. I think your point on this hello, listeners. No, I think your point on this is very interesting for me. I think insightful. I think it's true. I think there is something a little arbitrary about it. I think part of it is just the fact that we live in such a politically polarized country that sometimes issues that maybe it's not immediately obvious why they would be political, why they would be political in the way they are, why one side would think this and why one. They get to be that way in a sort of somewhat arbitrary, not completely. I think you also brought up a very good point about challenges to the status quo, which I think blew my mind a little bit. It's like, yeah, it's something. The response requires so much change. That if you're trying to keep things the same, it's like, I'm not on board with this.
Yeah, and maybe sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Go ahead.
But I mean, with climate change, or with any societal change, conservatives generally, like, they will change, but they are skeptical in the beginning, right? It's something where it needs to be massaged. You need to be made comfortable a little bit, and then you need to feel like it's your idea. Right? A little bit.
Yeah.
So if it's, hey, this is a problem, or do you think it's crazy to say that this is a problem? No, it's not crazy. It's like, all right, you're in charge. What do we do about it? It's like, okay, well, I think that we should maybe do this. And then they're totally on board with it. But if it becomes this dichotomy of we either it's a problem or it's not. If it is a problem, this is our only solution, or you're a bad person, that's when it becomes problematic.
I think we were talking a little bit about maybe a tendency, especially on the left, to antagonize people who you see as being backwards on some kind of social issue, like, oh, how dare you, you didn't know that you shouldn't use this term or something like that. And maybe it's not that those issues aren't important, that it's not important what words you use, but I think that sometimes this tactic, if you could call it that, I don't know if it's really thought out, but when you're if you antagonize people, I don't know how much that actually helps versus how much it's a demonstration of your own values, like to yourself or to people that already agree with you. Like, are you really, is it changing things? I don't know. Maybe sometimes it is. I could be wrong. But anyway, I think that there's a general issue, I would say, on the left, which is being super condescending to people on the right all the time, thinking, and just also treating people like they're evil because they have an opinion that you think is harmful or backwards or something. I think antagonizing people is maybe not helping us in the way that people sometimes think. I think sometimes people, their heart is in the right place in a way they think they're fighting the good fight. They're like, oh, how could you not care about this? How could you think this? Your position is harmful, and so I'm fighting for the good. But I think sometimes we get a little too, you can get self-righteous, you can get holier than thou, and I think it can be counterproductive. Yeah.
Here's another question for you, Trevor. It actually stems from a counterpoint that the right will often use in regards to climate change and transitioning to cleaner energy. Is if the intention or the motive is truly to transition to cleaner, more sustainable energies, why does an aversion to nuclear power persist on the left?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. And, I should preface by saying that I'm not an expert, and I could probably be convinced that I'm wrong on this. But I get a sense, honestly, I'm not super anti-nuclear, whereas I do think that is the general opinion on the left, that nuclear is always bad, that it's not worth the risks. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure we can just, write it off, especially if it could be done well, better, safer, or something. I maybe part of the way that I feel a bit of sympathy towards nuclear power is just that I sense that part of the reason why people are against it might not be entirely, I don't know, scientific. Like I think that it gives people the EBGBs to think, okay, there's going to be a nuclear reactor in my town. Maybe it would even do that to me. I don't know. I don't have one in my town, so I can't really say. But I don't think that we can write off any form of nuclear in any way as a solution. I don't think we can. I don't know. Okay, I had a question for you. This one, maybe a bit vague, maybe a little bit sensitive topic, but I guess basically the question is, could somebody's personal faith play a factor in how they react to something like climate change or something else that might be seen as an apocalyptic sort of thing? If for instance, if you somehow had the belief that this was in God's hands, this is not, we can't control it as human beings, this won't be allowed to happen. And I'm not singling out any particular faith. I think that this could be very general. It could happen in a lot of faiths, cultures, viewpoints, and maybe this question is extremely wobbly. And but anyway, I pose it to you, Michael.
Well, the short answer is yes. Somebody's faith or their belief system could contribute to how they view these sorts of apocalyptic or potentially apocalyptic events. There are some people who are probably of the mindset that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be rooted in faith, right? But, you have a subset of people on the right, for example, who say humans are so insignificant and
Right.
our activities are so insignificant that we can't possibly think our actions have any huge impact on the way that the world works or
Yeah.
the way that our planet operates. So that's not necessarily a statement that's made based on faith, but
Right.
it's at least similar in that people of faith might say, I don't know if they do, but they might say God's in control and he's not going to let our actions destroy his planet.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, I think that it's it, you, if it does if that is the case for some people, then I think it's probably, like you said, not necessarily a specific dogma of any church or something, but maybe just a more general concept, something about your fundamental way of viewing the world that might make you feel that way. I think that there are, not everybody, but I think there are a lot of people on the left that have a more chaotic view of the world. I think they view the world as unordered. I think sometimes they view the world as a bit cold. That sort of, what do you say? Materialistic view of the universe and humankind's place in it, where we are not protected. Really anything could happen. I think is a more common viewpoint, not universal. And I'm not sure that I would say that that's my viewpoint necessarily, but yeah.
All right. Well, I think at least for today's discussion, we can put a pin in it and move on. But appreciate your time, Trevor, explaining.
Yeah, likewise.
Explaining not only your own personal feelings, but also characterizing a lot of the concerns and a lot of the viewpoints that I feel the right thinks or assigns to the left, and explaining it a little bit better for all of us listening.
Yeah, well, I thank you for the same. I think a lot of what you said was very insightful, and I know that I benefited from the conversation personally. I hope that anybody listening might find it interesting and insightful as well. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Until next week, my friend.